church. I was standing at the door like I always do here on Sunday morning, and one of the guys came up and he pulled out his phone and he said, let me get a picture of this. I want a picture of you at the front door of the church. So it was a great time there with Fessiton, but it did leave us in a bit of bind here. We got a few weeks left this Sunday morning and 2 more Sunday mornings to finish the last 6 chapters of the Revelation, and so we will be taking 2 chapters each of these this morning and the next 2 weeks. They say that repetition is the best teacher, and so let's take a few minutes to review what we have seen in the Revelation, a broad overview of the book. I think if you get this broad overview of the book down, you'll be able to go into chapters of the book and the pieces might start fit together a little bit better. In chapter 1, verse 19, John gives us an outline for the book. John is told to write the things that are, the things that are to come, or the things you have seen, the things that are, and the things that are to come. He is first told to write what you have seen. That's what he does in chapter 1. Remember, he had that vision of Christ standing among the candlesticks. This glorious vision of Christ with the robe and the sash and all the brilliance of his presence standing among the candlesticks, which we are told in chapter 1 represents churches. Christ standing in the middle of churches in chapter 1. Write it down, John. Write down what you have seen, this vision of Christ. Then he is told to write the things that are. It's what you see happening in chapters 2 and 3. He picks up his pen and he writes 7 letters to 7 historical churches that were current at the time John was writing, addressing situations that they were going through in the present. Write the things that are, John. But then he is told to write the things that are to come. That's what we see from chapter 4 through the end of the book, to write the things that are to come. It starts off in chapters 4 and 5 where John is brought into the throne room and he sees the Father sitting on the throne with brilliant light, and in his hand he's holding a scroll that is rolled up and sealed with 7 seals. And John asked the question, who is worthy to open the scroll? And they looked all around and there wasn't anything worthy to open the scroll until the Lamb that was slain comes into the throne room. The resurrected Christ comes and he takes the scroll. That's what we see in chapters 4 and 5. And then Christ begins opening the scroll, breaking the 7 seals. And from chapter 6 through chapter 18, we see all kinds of judgments poured out upon the earth. Christ breaks open the seals. They are the 7 sealed judgments. With the breaking of each seal, a judgment is poured out upon the earth. You see that starting in chapter 6. When he breaks the 7th seal, you sort of think that the judgments are over, but they're not. The 7th seal merely introduces 7 more judgments, trumpet judgments. 7 angels come forward with 7 trumpets, and they begin to blast their trumpets one at a time. And with the blasting of each trumpet, a judgment is poured out upon the earth. In chapter 11, verse 25, we reach the midpoint of all of these judgments. From chapter 6 through chapter 18, it covers a 7-year period of time that we know as the tribulation. And in chapter 11, verse 25, it's the midpoint of the tribulation. We are told it's at 42 months, 1,260 days. At the midpoint of the tribulation, the 7th trumpet sounds. You hope that it's the last of the judgments, but bad things come in 3. There's the seal judgments, the trumpet judgments, the bowl judgments. And starting in 1125, the bowl judgments are poured out upon the earth. These are judgments that are on steroids. The first seal judgments, they were bad. The trumpet judgments were bad, but the bowl judgments are infinitely worse. 7 angels come out with each carrying a bowl, and one by one the bowl is tipped over and a judgment is poured out upon earth, bringing complete devastation to the earth dwellers. These 7 bowl judgments, beginning in chapter 11, verse 25. We've come to the end of the series of judgments. In fact, in chapter 16, verses 12 to 16, we see the 6th bowl. Remember what the 6th bowl judgment was? It was poured out and the Euphrates River dried up. The Euphrates River dried up. That allowed for some kings from the east access to march towards Israel, to march towards Jerusalem. A huge army, 200 million, we are told, is positioned to come in and to attack Israel. In fact, in Revelation chapter 16, verse 16, I think it is, we are told that this is Armageddon, that famous battle that makes us all very, very nervous, Armageddon. Megiddo is a city at the north of Jerusalem, north of the hill country of Judah. Some of you may have been at Megiddo. Megiddo is a city that has, I remember being there, and you go deep down into the archaeological dig, and the guide will tell you that Megiddo has been built and destroyed 13 or 14 times over the centuries. Armageddon, H-A-R in Hebrew, is Har, mountain. This is Mount Megiddo. What makes it a mountain is that the city has been destroyed so many times, and each time they rebuild on that site. And so you start building a mountain out of all of the ruins below. You build this mountain. And so at this place where there have been so many historic battles over the centuries, there's going to come one last final climactic battle where all of those armies coming across the Euphrates River in the east will be marching on Israel. That's the 6th bowl. And then the 7th bowl is poured out. And in Revelation chapter 16, verse 17, the 7th angel poured out the bowl into the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice saying, "It is done." Verse 19 of chapter 16. The great city split into 3 parts. The cities of the nations collapsed. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with wine of fury, of the fury of his wrath. This last judgment is poured out, and it's a targeted judgment. It is a judgment on Babylon the Great. It is a judgment meant to destroy Babylon the Great. And in chapters 17 and 18, we see in excruciating detail this judgment that is poured out on Babylon the Great. It raises a question, doesn't it? Who is this Babylon? Who is this Babylon the Great? And why is it being judged so severely? That's what we will see in chapters 17 and 18. 2 chapters are spent on the destruction of Babylon the Great. This Babylon the Great must be something important for us to understand. Let's jump into it and see if we can figure out who or what is Babylon the Great, and why is it judged so severely? Look at it beginning in chapter 17, verse 1. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowl judgments came to me, John says, and says, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits on many waters. With her the kings of the earth committed adulteries, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into the desert, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast and covered with blasphemous names, and the 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet. She's dressed to the nines and was glittering with gold and precious stones and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. And the title was on her forehead, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. Oh, that answers our question, doesn't it? We know who Babylon the Great is. Or do we? Man, what an incredible vision John has. If we didn't know better, we'd probably think John had just eaten some bad pizza the night before and had this nightmare of a dream. But look at John's response to this vision at the end of verse 6. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. I'm sure he was astonished. It wasn't just because this is a bit of a confusing sight. I mean, in verse 1, John is told, come here and I will show you the destruction of a great prostitute. And what does he see? He sees a woman dressed to the nines, enjoying pleasures and drinking from a golden cup. It's as if John might be thinking, if this is punishment, I'll take some of that. I mean, look at her. She's so prosperous. Everything's going wonderful for her. She's in control. But the vision isn't over. There's more to come. John's astonishment is going to be calmed as the page is turned and we see what happens to this drunk prostitute. It is called a mystery. Let's look at the clues and try to solve the mystery. Before we see what happens to the drunken prostitute, let's try to understand the main characters in this scene as it plays out. In verse 1, it says you see a prostitute sitting on waters. In verse 3, this same woman is sitting on a red beast. Who is this dragon lady? And what about her mounts? What is this waters? And what is this great red beast? Let's see who each of these main players are. Maybe that will help us solve the mystery. Let's start with the simplest first. She's sitting on waters. That's pretty easy to identify. Look a few verses down in verse 15. The angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. That's the waters. The waters is the expanse of people. It's humanity. It's the earth dwellers. It's the nations, the tribes, the tongues. And the picture of this woman sitting on the waters is meant to communicate that something about this woman controls and dominates. She's controlling, she's dominating humanity. So the waters are people, the population of earth dwellers who are alive during this time of the tribulation period are being dominated by this woman. Let's identify the second player, the beast. It says that she sits on a great red beast, a great red dragon. The beast is somewhat easy for us to identify because we were introduced to this beast before. Remember back in chapter 13? The beast is an individual we commonly refer to as the Antichrist. That's what we saw back in chapter 13. In chapter 13, verse 1, it said the beast had 10 horns and 7 heads, and it came up out of the waters. It was a human being coming up out of the mass of humanity. The beast is described the same way in verse 3 of chapter 17, having 10 horns and 7 heads. Look at these horns and look at these heads. In verse 3 of chapter 17, the beast is described as having 7 heads. These heads are identified a few verses later, down in verse 9 of chapter 17. This calls for wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. Remember what the 7 hills are? It's the city of Rome. Just like Denver is the mile-high city, Denver's described by its geography, or Pittsburgh is the Three Rivers city, described by its geography. So also Rome is often described by its geography, the city of 7 hills. The 7 heads are these 7 hills upon which the woman sit. It refers to Rome. Now, this could refer to Rome specifically as the city, or I take it, it refers to Rome in a much broader context. That this first century was a time when there was a huge transition where the power on earth used to be in the east. It used to be with Babylon. It used to be with the Medes and the Persians, the center of world culture, the center of power in the world. Used to be Eastern dominated. But in the first century, with really the rise of Greece and then Rome, there was a huge shift to the west. And so I think John is saying that this may not be just Rome itself, but at that time, Rome was the center of Western culture, that this beast is coming up out of the West, out of Western culture. Look down at verse 9. There is a political connection to these heads. 5 had fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. He must remain a little while, and the beast that once was and now is not is an 8th king. Commentators have scratched their heads trying to figure out what this means. It talks about there were 5 kings, and then there was one that was a short time, and then one that is coming, and then there will be an 8th. They try to scratch their heads figuring out what this is. Truth is, we don't know for sure. Some think this refers to the Roman emperors, that up to this point there had been 5 emperors of Rome: Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Vespasian was on the throne. He would be the 6th. Then Titus would be on the throne for a short time. And as John was writing this, Domitian was the 8th. And so some think this might be a reference to the Roman emperors who were there in the first century. Others, instead of looking at specific Roman emperors, they suggest that these 7 heads are 7 kings and kingdoms. As John writes the Revelation, the world used to be dominated by the Eastern powers, the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Babylonians, the Medes and the Persians. But then there was now the Greek empires, and Rome was now the only superpower. So that gives you how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 with Rome, and then maybe there is another superpower coming out of the West. People try to figure out who are these 7 kings, with the 8th one to come, representing this woman on a beast. Truth is, we don't know for sure. What we do know for sure is that these heads represent kings and kingdoms. There are 7 horns, there are 10 horns. The Bible uses horns to represent power. Look at verse 12. And verse 12 identifies these horns as kings. Kings joined together for one purpose, an alliance of kings. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. Look at verse 13. They have one purpose, and will give their power and authority to the beast. And they will make war against the Lamb. But the Lamb, Jesus Christ, will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. These horns are political rulers. They are kings and kingdoms who will join their authority, their power together in a coalition, placing themselves under the authority of this beast, the Antichrist. Let's step back and see if we can make sense of this a little bit. Let's put the clues together and see if we can gain some insight into this mystery. We saw in chapter 13 that the beast is none other than the political figure called the Antichrist, a person who is going to dominate the world stage. And you can understand what would bring him to power. If indeed the rapture has taken place, that's going to result in a lot of confusion and chaos on earth. And for somebody to step on the scene and bring some calm, to make some sense out of it, to provide some direction, they are going to acquire a whole lot of power. John is prophesying that this beast will be a political leader with connections to Rome. The connection could be that he leads a European confederacy that, or could headquarters in Rome, or it could be merely a representation that he's the leader of Western powers, Western culture. You see, as John is living at this time, there is that transition from the East to the West. Even today in our world, we see that the recent world struggles have been a battle of East and West. That's part of the goal of the Islamic extremists, to issue in a time when the world resets its clocks back to the 7th century under the domination of Islamic powers, Islamic authorities, and Islamic caliphate. This political leader, whom we commonly refer to as the Antichrist, rises to be that 8th king that is the dominant figure in world politics. And others join in with him to battle against the Lamb. Well, so 2 of our 3 characters have been identified. We've seen the waters as the mass of humanity, the earth dwellers. We see this beast as the Antichrist. But who is this woman? Who is this woman that dominates the earth dwellers? She rides on the waters. Who is this woman that even dominates the beast? She rides on the beast. Look at verse 15. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate this prostitute that's on his back, and they will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to give the beast their power to rule until God's words are fulfilled. This woman, whoever she is, thinks she can tame the beast, but she can't. The beast eventually throws off her control. But who is this woman? Who is this woman that's described as a prostitute, dressed to kill, drinking a golden cup of blood? Who is this woman that dominates people for a while and dominates the beast until the beast is through with her and destroys her? The answer is given to us in verse 18. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Now that answers our question, doesn't it? Let's take a step back for a moment. This woman is described as a city. What is a city? A city is a place where people live together in community. It is as if the cities are the best that humanity has to offer. As alabaster cities gleamed, undimmed by human tears, we see the best that mankind can accomplish. Look at the cities. They're a demonstration of our ability, of our power, of our ingenuity. Look at the skyscrapers. Look at the engineering. Look at all that man is able to bring together in a city. It's the best that man can do. Take a step back further, even all the way back to the book of Genesis. This is where we are first introduced to this Babylon the Great. Let's take a brief trip through the early chapters of Genesis, and maybe that will help us identify what this city means. Our journey begins in chapter 4. We are introduced to Adam and Eve's son named Cain. Adam and Eve raised Cain, and you know what Cain did. He killed his brother. But what did Cain do after killing Abel? Cain killed Abel, and God announced the punishment in Genesis. God said to Cain, "You will be a fugitive and you will wander throughout the earth." But what did Cain do? In chapter 4, verse 17, we see that Cain went out and he built a city. Talk about defiance of God. Instead of wandering, he put down roots and he stayed put. He built a city. It's curious to note that the first mention of a city is an act of defiance by Cain. Cain was going to show what he could do. It was the best that he could offer. Move a little forward in the book of Genesis, and in Genesis chapter 9, Noah and his sons exit the ark. They are told to multiply and to fill the whole earth. I know some people have taken that as an individual mandate. It's not an individual mandate to have as many kids as you can have. It's humanity. I want you to fill the whole earth. And you read in chapter 9, verse 16, where Noah and his sons obeyed God. They dispersed. They spread out. In the next chapter, Genesis chapter 10, you see a long list of genealogies, emphasizing in the genealogies how people were spreading across the earth in obedience to God. But then you come to Genesis 11. What happens in Genesis 11? In Genesis 11, we see the city of Babel, precursor to Babylon of the Revelation. Instead of spreading out as God had commanded, mankind joined together in defiance against God. In defiance against God, man built a city, and they said, "We can be as great as God is. We don't need God." They built a tower. Humanity living from God in an organized but godless community said, "Let's build a city," and in that city they would build a tower that would reach to the heavens so that we can make a name for ourselves, they said. The city was to be the best that man could offer. Civilized people apart from God in an organized and godless community. I would suggest to you that this is the woman. This is what the prostitute represents. This is what a city is. It isn't so much a specific place in the Revelation as it represents civilized man apart from God in an organized and godless community. It is man doing the best that man can do. To put in other terms, it is a world system that is opposed to the plan of God. In fact, it tries to totally eliminate God, to do war against the Lamb, seducing people away from God. As another interesting sidelight, it is interesting to note that the destruction of this city in chapters 17 and 18, we will see a new city. We will see God's city, the new Jerusalem, come down from heaven. I know you've been having your thinking caps on. Let's see if we can put Revelation 17 together and try to understand what this vision is. This prostitute is a world system that I would suggest to you is now in place. It is civilized humanity apart from God in an organized but godless community. It's humanism. It's the best that man can do. It is a political, economic, religious system in which man is declaring to God, "We don't need you." It is the thought that man is better than God, that we can do away with God. That is this woman. It is the world system that opposes the plans and purposes of God. The beast is the Antichrist, a world political leader, and the waters represent the earth dwellers. John sees this world system dominating the earth dwellers. And John sees people of all tribes, nations, and tongues organized but apart from God. The system is satanic in its origin, controlling the earth dwellers. Man is doing the best he can do. Man is seeking satisfaction and fulfillment for himself. The system is so seductive. It's dressed in the finest clothes. It has the most satisfying pleasures. And it uses the best utensils, a golden cup, this world system seductively appealing. And yet it destroys the saints of God, drinking their blood. Furthermore, John sees this woman, this world system. For a while, she's riding the beast. But then the beast bucks her off. The beast turns against the system. The beast destroys the system because it really isn't about humanity. It really isn't about the system. It really is about the evil one who wants to dominate even more than the system. Well, what is this woman? I would suggest to you, it is civilized humanity apart from God in an organized, godless community. The beast is the Antichrist. The picture John paints is that Satan is now today and at this time using this world system, which is so attractively dressed to accomplish his purpose against the Son of God. There is coming a time when Satan will throw out the world system, and Satan himself will step forward as the one that we see who is trying to dominate even the world system. Let's come to chapter 18. We see the destruction. We see the destruction of this beast. We see the destruction of the world system. We see the destruction of Satan's attempt to thwart the plans and purposes of God. We won't look at every verse. Look at verse 1. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, the best that man can do. She has become a home for demons and a haunt for evil, every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich with her excessive luxuries. In verses 9 to verse 20, it almost reads like an Amazon wish list. You can see everything you could ever possibly want. In verse 12, you see jewelry. In the end of verse 12, you see clothing. You see furniture for the homes. You see bronze and iron in verse 12. You see perfumes in verse 13. You see groceries and all kinds of wine, olive oil, flour, and wheat. In verse 13, you take a trip to the butcher shop in verse 13, see some beef and mutton and on. You see all of these things that satisfy man, all of the things that the world system uses to seduce us into it, saying we can find our satisfaction and our contentment in what the world has to offer us. But it's all going to be destroyed. Look at it in verse 21. Then an angel picked up a stone like a giant millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "So will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will never be found again. And the sound of harpists and musicians, flute players, trumpeters will never be heard in you again, nor craftsmen of any craft will be found in you again, or the sound of mill will never be heard in you again. The light of the lamp will never shine in you again. The voice of the groom and bride will never be heard in you again. For your merchants were powerful people. because all the nations were deceived by your witchcraft, and in her was found the blood of prophets and saints and all who have been slaughtered on earth, and she will be destroyed, cast with a millstone around her neck into the sea. But look up at verse 4. Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to the heavens. Remember the Tower of Babel? We're going to reach up to the heavens. With what we can accomplish, we're going to reach up into the heavens. We are going to be like God, but what we pile up isn't good things reaching into heavens. It's our wickedness, it's our evil, it's all of these things that are piled up to the heavens. And God has remembered her crimes. Babylon the Great. We must understand that ever since Satan went into the throne room of heaven, declaring he wanted to be worshiped as God, he wanted to be like God, he wanted to be God, there has been a war taking place. A war between God and Satan. This war was transferred from the throne room of heaven onto planet Earth when God cast the evil one out of the heavens. And here on earth, ever since Satan started slithering in the garden, there has been a cosmic warfare taking place. We're not just battling against temptation. We don't just battle against sin. We battle against the whole system that Satan wants to use to dominate the earth dwellers so that Satan would be viewed just as powerful as God. We are pawns in this cosmic battle that is taking place all around us. But here in chapters 17 to 18, we see there is the final shutdown of this battle. That Satan, he's had 7 years to put together a system in which he's able to dominate earth, but he will be destroyed. He's had a political leader in place, the Antichrist, to dominate the earth dwellers, the waters. He has done the best he could do to make his coup against the rule and reign of God, but there is coming a time when God is going to say, enough. And Satan will be destroyed. The world system he has put in place will be destroyed. And then in chapters 19 and to the end, we will move into the millennium and beyond, where we will see the rule and reign of God without Satan nipping at his heels. We will see what God has for mankind without Satan trying to ruin everything. I know it's confusing. In some ways, Revelation chapters 17 and 18 are the most confusing chapters in the book. If you're able to identify these three players, the waters, the beast, and the woman, I think you can go back and make sense of these two chapters. The toughest one to identify is the woman, because it really isn't a person. The woman is the best that man can do. The world system, which offers satisfaction to humanity, will be destroyed because, in truth, it does not, it cannot, it will not satisfy us. I know that's a lot of stuff. Any questions that I can make it more confusing? Does that make a little sense, what's going on here in chapter 17 and 18? Does it make a little sense? It's just a cosmic battle taking place between God and the best that man can do. All right. Yes.
Between the economic and religious
do I draw any distinction between the economic and religious systems that this woman uses between what is going on right now? I think what's going on right now is all a precursor that that there really are four systems in this world that will all be joined together. There is the political system, and there is a religious system. It's interesting to see in the Old Testament that you had priests and kings. You had the religious system, priests, and the political system, kings, and they were not to be joined together. It was only Christ who was the priest king. But in the world systems, they will join together religion and politics, because that will give the most control over people. If we can control their religion through politics, we will do that. And maybe we see some of that beginning to happen now. So there is the political system, religious system, the economic system, that if you are going to participate in our economy, you will have to use this number. We see those things in place right now, where if you are going to participate in the system, you have to use your number. Is the number your social security number? Is it your credit card number? Is it your bank account number? It will be an electronic system in which you will not be able to participate unless you align with them politically and religiously. And then, yes, there is the military system. So we see pieces of it, we see parts of it right now. But in the tribulation, because of the crisis, I take it, of the rapture, these will all be brought together. I think some people have said, is COVID, is coronavirus part of the tribulation? Maybe it was, maybe it isn't. But what we do know for sure is that it certainly shows us how a political system can be in place to control us. It can control us religiously. We'll shut down your churches. It will control us economically. You can't go in the store unless you have a mask. It will control us in all kinds of ways. So do I think COVID and the government's response to COVID was demonic? Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it shows us how it can happen in the future, that all the pieces are put in place where it'd be easy for these four systems to be brought together under the authority of one figure, that Antichrist. Political, economic, religious, military. Four systems brought together. And you need all four. You need the military to enforce the other three. You need the political and the religious, because that's just what, and economic is obvious, yes. Yes?
City best suits, fits all those criteria.
What city?
Yeah,
I don't limit city to, it's interesting in verse 1, it says, all the cities are destroyed. All the cities are destroyed in chapter 17, verse 1. So I don't think, when it talks about the city, I don't think it represents one city as much as the concept as what a city is. A city is man saying, this is the best we can do. Some people would say New York City, could be, has been the dominant city in the world economically and politically in many ways. But I'm not sure. So I don't think when it talks about a city in Revelation 7:18, it's referring to any one specific city. All the cities are going to be destroyed. And more importantly, what's going to be destroyed is the concept that man can be joined together, and that the best man can offer can rise to the level of being equal with God. That's what's going to be destroyed. I think I mentioned before that I had a professor in college who said that in Genesis 11, God told man to split apart. And so you look in the Bible, that command has never been rescinded. And so his thought is that cities are inherently evil because they are in violation of that command of God to spread apart. And you look at cities, whatever city it is, cities is where humanity gathers together and sin just is on steroids, and you see complete evil happening as man gathers together. And so those of you living in North Dakota, you're being very biblical. You have spread apart. Devil's Lake, the 10th largest city in North Dakota. That's pretty good.
The combining of political and religious is an interesting thought. If you think about the countries or that have been the most ungodly, those have always been combined.
Yeah. Yeah, even Rome got to the place where their emperor combined political and religious. He needed to be worshipped as a god, and eventually, downfall there. So, all right, I need to let you go. Or,
Mentioned so many places about drinking blood and being intoxicated in blood.
right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the blood that she was drinking was the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs, the world system destroying the people of God, and especially in the tribulation. Chapter 6, you saw the martyrs under the altar, those that the world had destroyed even during the tribulation. So this world system is going to chew up, spit out those who are believers. It's attacks against God followers. Yeah. Well, the hard part of the Revelation is over. It really is. Next week, we'll be in chapters 19 and 20, and we'll talk about millennium. What is millennium? And why is it important? What does it mean, millennium? And what's the rule of God going to be like on earth? And why is it important for there to be a millennium? We'll see that chapters 19 and 20, and then we'll go from millennium to beyond in chapters 21 and 22. And in those chapters, I will give you my heresy about heaven. Show me one verse in the Bible that says we're going to heaven. It's a challenge for you. Show me one verse in the Bible that says we're going to heaven. Anyway, show me one verse in the Bible that says we're going to be walking on these streets of gold and all. So we have so many concepts and so many thoughts that are warm, fuzzy thoughts, but what is an accurate view of what our eternal state is going to be like? Truth is, it's going to be better than sitting on a cloud strumming a harp. It's going to be much better than that. So we will look at that in chapters 21 and 22. Join me in prayer. Father, yes, there are times when this revelation is mind-boggling. We want to know the details. We want to know the specifics. And yet there are times when we need to step back and see the broad view. And the big view in these two chapters is that right now we are living in a world that is not a friend of grace. We are living at a time when this world is trying to seduce people into engaging in its system, being part of its system, to joining this coup attempt against your rule and reign. In many ways, we are enemy combatants behind the lines, battling for you in a place, in a time where we see so many of our friends just seduced by what the world can offer. And you look at what the world can offer, and for a while it seems very fulfilling, very satisfying, but in the end, it's all going to be destroyed, and you have left us here to encourage each other not to be part of this world system. You have left us here to reach out to those who are held captive in this world system, and showing them there is a better way. There is life in Jesus Christ. There is eternal life. We don't have to face the destruction. And so help us to be wise as we live in this place and in this time where the evil one and the mass of humanity are going to try to dominate. Help us to be wise, representing Christ in this day and in this age. And it's when we read chapters like this that we join with John and we say, Maranatha, come quickly, Lord Jesus. We pray for you to come, to bring your rule and your reign on this planet. In Jesus' name, amen. You are dismissed.